Hello. So it's been a while since I've done one of these pajama revelations and just had a really great quiet time. I mean, I've had a lot of them over the last several weeks and months, but I've got time. So I want to be able to share this one with you guys. And it's from Nehemiah. That's where I'm reading. I'm reading in Nehemiah right now, almost done with Nehemiah. But I want to share in particularly from chapter 9, verses 25 through 31, and then pause and then kind of go from 33 to the end. But really what I wrote in my journal, and that's I'm really sharing from this morning, is just all the things that God does to get our attention, all the things that God does to win us to himself. And really, all the things that he's doing to save us from our own choices, to save us from ourselves. And it really is stunning. I think a lot of times we don't realize all the ways that God has invested in reaching me and reaching you, and we need to pay attention. So just thinking through that, starting at verse 25, Nehemiah just kind of really recounts for them all the ways in which they have been blessed, so many ways. And he's telling them that there are blessings upon blessings that God has given us. And not only did God give us these blessings, he's given us the opportunity to actually enjoy them. You know, it's one thing to be blessed and not be able to enjoy what God has given you. It's another thing to be blessed and be able to enjoy it. So he's saying it's a double blessing, because not only has God been good to you this way, but he's given you the ability to enjoy and to partake in that goodness. Then in verse 26, he goes on and he says that God also gave us his law. And then Nehemiah defines that law for us in verse 29. And he tells us that it's through the law that we can find life. So God's law is good, and it leads us to something good called life. So God's law is not taking anything from us. It's trying to give us something that we do not really have, which is true life, true living. So of course that law leads us to life, and that life is all about God, and God, the revelation of God's life is in Jesus. So just follow the progression. Follow the progression. But God's law is teaching us how to live. It's teaching us how to be alive, truly alive. That's what God's law is all about. So he gives us blessings and gives us the ability to enjoy it. He gives us his law that through them we find life. It says that in verse 26 and also in verse 30, that God is also sending us his prophets to warn us based on what's in the law. Because you and I are naturally prone to stupidity. We're prone to foolishness. We're prone to our own self-rule. We are not prone to listening to the good voice of God and doing what it is that he's calling us to do or telling us to do. So we need prophets, and this is an act of God's goodness that he sends prophets to warn us, to pull us back, to awaken us so that we can remember some things and hopefully make better decisions. But then it also goes on to say in verse 27 and also in verse 30 that God will allow us to suffer the consequences of our bad choices. So you know what? You're not listening to the prophets. You're not listening to the warning. You're not reaching for that law that's going to allow you to find life. Then God will allow us to inherit the consequences of our bad choices. He's not going to save us from our bad choices. When that bad choice, that suffering, might be the wake-up call. Now, not all suffering that happens in our life is due to bad choices. What we got to recognize, though, is that there is suffering that can be the direct result, maybe even the indirect result of some of our bad choices. But the goodness of God, again, shows up in Nehemiah chapter 9, because it says in verse 27 that despite our ignorance, despite our bad choices, God, because he is so merciful, is going to send liberators. So he's given us his law, he's given us blessing, he's sending us our prophets, but when we start to suffer from our choices, God is also trying to liberate us. So he's going to send people to us as liberators, the voice of reason, somebody to pull us up out of the muck and the mire. So we've got to pay attention to who the liberators are. And then it tells us in verse 28 that God, no matter what my choices are, he is still listening for my cry for help. God has positioned himself to listen, to hear me when I cry out. Crying out is a form of prayer. So God is waiting for me to cry out. And the promise right there that we see in Nehemiah is that God is listening. And then something else that we see in verse 28 is that God is not just going to try to liberate me once. He's not just listening to me once, right? God, it says, is willing to rescue us many times because of his mercy. So God is not one and done. He's not, I told you so. You should have figured it out then. That's how we are. That's not how God is. So God is willing to rescue us many times, not because of who I am, but because of who he is, because he's a merciful God. He's a good God. Thank God that he's willing, that he's that invested in saving me from me, right? Then it goes on to say in verse 30 that God is sending his spirit to us through his prophets. He's sending his spirit through the prophets to continue to warn us, because you know what? We're just that hard-headed. We're just that thick-headed to repeat the same mistake that God is trying to rescue us from, to repeat the same mistake that God is trying to save us from, right? So he sends his spirit through his prophets. And then it goes on in verse 31, again, just the evidence of the mercy of God, that he does not destroy us completely. And you know what? Paul tells us in Romans chapter 6 that the wages of our sin is actually death. So we should be completely undone, completely destroyed from those unintentional and especially those intentional sins. But God does not allow us to be completely destroyed, even though that's where some of our choices should take us. That's also the mercy of God. And then it says also that he doesn't abandon us. Oh my gosh. He can't, because he is Emmanuel, God with us. And so this is this eternal promise that God is not the one that abandons us. We can abandon God because of our rebellion or our rejection or our disobedience or our hard-headedness or our stubbornness. We are the ones that abandon God, but God does not abandon us. He does not abandon us. That is the goodness of God. And so then Nehemiah, I just got to read it to you. Nehemiah, this is the reality. He's kind of laying this out in a prayer before the people, like, this is the God that we serve. But hello, this is who we are, right? So he goes on to say that every time God punished us, he was doing what was just. We were simply getting what we deserved. So Nehemiah wasn't trying to make any excuses. He wasn't trying to justify bad behavior. He recognized that there were certain things happening to them as a people, as a nation, that were the direct result of the choices that they had made. And he said that our kings, they messed up. Our leaders, they messed up. Our priests, our spiritual leadership, they were messing up. All of the people were messing up. Why? Because they did not obey your law. They did not listen to the warnings that were in your commands. They did not listen to the warnings that were in your laws. So even while, he says, even while they had their own kingdom, even while it was good, even while they had all these blessings, even while God was sending them prophets and liberators, and he was sending them the law that would give them life, even while God did all of this, he says, we didn't serve him. We didn't serve God. Though God showered us with goodness, though he gave us fertile land, we still refused. We refused to listen. And he says, and we turned to our wickedness. We chose our wickedness over God's goodness. So he says, so you know what the result is? Now we're slaves. Now we are slaves in this land of plenty. Now we are slaves in this place where there's so much goodness and so much blessing. We are slaves here because of our sins. That's the result. We're slaves because of our sins. And then he says, and now we're serving, in many ways, our sin, and we're in misery. But is any of it God's fault? No, it's our own choices. And so I say this because in our humanity, you and I are pretty doggone daft. In our humanity, we're not listening when we need to be listening. So I'm telling you, if God is trying to save you from yourself, you're in a bad relationship, you're in an unholy relationship, you're in an immoral relationship, and you know it, then you're going to enter into this slavery in a good land. You're going to be miserable, but it's from your own choices. Pay attention to what God is trying to do to liberate you. Some of us, he's trying to liberate from a really bad habit. He's trying to liberate some of us from what comes out of our mouths. He's trying to liberate us from just addictions. He's trying to liberate us from pride. He's trying to liberate us from self-righteousness or religiosity that doesn't help anybody, especially me. So he is trying to liberate us. He is trying to deliver us. He is trying to communicate to us. He stands ready to listen to us. He stands ready to set us free. Don't be a slave in the midst of all of God's blessings. Don't reject his goodness for stupidity, for wickedness, for sin. Why? Why? What's so good about your sin that you would let go of the good things of God? So listen to the prophets. Listen to the still small voice of the Spirit. Listen, look out for the liberators and receive God's mercy. He loves you. He has not abandoned you. And he wants you to be set free from yourself and your self-rule. He's leading you to that good law that through which, if you would find it, if you would spend time in it, if you would read it, would lead you to life itself, which is Jesus.